right, I think we're live now, but let's wait some minutes for people to join us. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our virtual dental shadowing session. We want to remind you that in order to get your hours, you have to take a short quiz. And as long as you get 3 out of 5, you will earn your hours. The quiz link will be located in our link tree, which is in our Instagram bio. All right, let's get started. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Felty for today's session. I'm handing the mic to you. Feel free to start whenever you want.
Thank you. So guys, I wanted to just give you a little overview about myself and what it's like to be an orthodontist. I'm going to go over a couple cases with you, but I would love at the end to answer any questions that you have about dentistry or orthodontics in general. So I'm originally from Pennsylvania. I was born and raised in a small town in rural Pennsylvania, and I now practice in Abbotsford, British Columbia, Canada. I married a Canadian, and hence I got imported up here. But I originally went to school at Villanova University, which is right outside of Philadelphia. I was a double major in biology and honor science while I was there, and I was also a part of the swim team, which is great because it paid for school, and you're in school for a long time when you're going through ortho. So I stayed in Philly and went downtown to Temple University, and that is where I met my husband. He is a general dentist. He's actually a year ahead of me in dental school. He was supposed to be helping me when we met. We met in the oral surgery clinic because the fourth years got paired with the third years, and you're supposed to kind of help out, show us what to do. He wasn't paying attention at all, and he suctioned my hair with like the bloody suction in the oral surgery clinic. So it wasn't the best meeting ever, but we got over it. And I stayed at Temple and I did my residency in ortho there. It was a 28-month program. And what was really cool is I was a part of an all-female class, which is unusual, especially because for any of you that are familiar with how residency programs work, it's just like med school where it's a match program. And so you basically are ranking the schools you want to go to, and the schools are ranking the applicants, and it spits out like one school, and it's kind of like, here's where you're going. So it's unusual that there were 6 women that matched at the time, but it was a great little over 2 years there. And so then I moved to Canada afterwards. I have 4 kids, ranging in age from 6 months to 7. So it's a little bit crazy at our house. And I initially started working when I moved here. I did have to take a licensing exam when I moved to Canada, but it's kind of like moving to different sections of the US. So you have to take different board exams in the US as well. So there's like a Northern Regional Board and a Western Regional Board. Some of them have reciprocity, but they're essentially like licensing exams. And so the nice part is with Canada and the US, the schools are accredited together. So I didn't have to redo any schooling when I moved here. I just had to take an exam. And I originally started working out of my husband's general dentistry practice. I knew growing up in rural Pennsylvania that I did not want to have a long commute. That was one thing that I really didn't want. You know, it was a half-hour drive to the grocery store when I was little, and I was done with that. And so there wasn't really an opportunity for me in the town that we were living in. And he was working with his father. He also has a brother and sister that have their own dental practices as well in town. And so clearly I did well. I married my referral base. And so it made sense for me to stay in town. And so I started out, and for about 3 years, I was essentially like an in-house orthodontist for their practices. And I was just seeing patients there. I had an opportunity with another orthodontist in town a couple years in where he was looking to move out of his current space, but wasn't really ready to kind of do it all over again. And so we were a bit untraditional in that we took both of our practices and we combined them. And we started out as 50-50 partners from the day we merged, having never practiced together. And it's was wonderful. We practiced together for almost 6 years, and he just retired this year during COVID. And so now I have the practice on my own, and I am looking for an associate to bring on because I really think that a partnership practice has the best of both worlds. It gives you work-life balance. It allows you to mentally check out on the days that you're not in the office because you know someone who's equally invested in the practice is going to be there to kind of keep working and moving patients along for you. So I'm going to go over a couple tips I have for both high school and college students. If you are a high school student, I often get asked, what classes should you take? Honestly, if you have the opportunity to take any AP classes, take them. I don't really think it matters in terms of what subject they are. The reason being that if you get the college credit for them, it's just going to help you reduce your course load when you're in college, which is an advantage. It can allow you to focus on the courses that you're currently taking. For me, being in a very small school that had 50 kids in the class, we had 2 AP courses. That was it my senior year. And I took both. One was in like US history and one was in calculus. But just having even those 6 credits go into college was helpful, especially if you are a science major and are going to have a slightly heavier course load with labs. It helps to be able to kind of have those credits there as backup. Also, if it's a course that well, it's bio and I'm going to have to retake it in college anyway, it still gives you an introduction to it. And so everything that you're hearing the second time is going to be easier to comprehend and to study for you. So it gives you an advantage that way. Also, if you have time, asking your local dentist to kind of shadow and see what a day is really like. Obviously, if you're already a patient of theirs, they're going to be more likely to allow you to come in. I'm not necessarily saying you're going to work there, but just kind of getting a gist of what goes on, what the lingo is, and kind of what your day-to-day is going to look like if that's the job that you end up pursuing. A couple things that I didn't know, because I come from a background that has no dentists in it, no one in the dental field, and I didn't know any of this before I was applying to dental school. So one, if you're in high school, there are 7-year combined programs that will grant you your bachelor's degree and your dental degree. I have them listed here on the screen on the right-hand side. So those are all these are all the dental schools that have relationships with undergraduate colleges. They are also listed on this on the website that I have posted there. And what this means is that you apply straight out of high school instead of having to go through an application process twice. So for example, if you want to go to UPenn, they had a relationship with Villanova, which was like the school that I went to. And I didn't know about this until I was actually on Villanova's campus. And so you would apply and then they would admit you to Villanova and UPenn at the exact same time. And as long as you maintain like a 3.5 GPA while you're in college, you spend 3 years in your undergrad degree and you go to dental school then at the beginning of what would have been your 4th year. And that first year of dental school counts to complete your bachelor's degree at the previous undergrad school. And so you cannot enter this once you've already matriculated into college. It has to be done initially, but the advantage is that you don't have to go through the stressful application process again, getting into dental school. It's kind of essentially guaranteed as long as you maintain good grades. I did not know that you don't have to be a science major to apply to dental school. And in fact, I would highly encourage any and all of you to minor in business if at all possible. I think one of the major things that is still lacking in dental education is business courses. When you get done, for the vast majority of you, you will run a business. Your practice will be a small business. You will have employees. You will have to deal with human resources and kind of how to manage and market and balance a budget and all these things that I had no exposure to previously. And that being said, too, you can also major in something you just are really interested in. And I think with the way technology is going, engineering, physics, these are not traditional majors. Most people just think of biology as being the major for medical and dental schools, but I think there's a lot more that you can expand into if you want. That also being said, you don't actually need to complete your bachelor's degree to get into dental school. Most dental schools require 3 years of college and 90 credits. They also have required courses, which I'll show you here. So these are the required courses for almost all the dental schools. There are some recommended courses as well. Both my husband and my brother-in-law do not have a bachelor's degree. They both entered dental school after 3 years. And so they both, and my husband was a math major. And so he enjoyed math and took the required courses. And then after when he was in his 3rd year of college, he applied to dental school and got in. And I say that because, the cost of education is going up drastically, especially if you're from the States. It's not nearly as bad here in Canada, but it's definitely something that you should be considering, and something I didn't know at 17 or 18 when I was applying, that I should be looking at kind of the student debt I was going to be in 10 or 11 years later. Is it absolutely worth it? 100%. I love my job and I wouldn't change it, but I think those are things that I probably should have been a little bit more fiscally responsible for when I was applying to schools and looking at schools. I do remember that when I got into UPenn and Temple, because I was from Pennsylvania, I was able to access in-state tuition. So the schools I applied to for dental school were Pittsburgh, Penn, Columbia, NYU, and Temple. And I got into all those schools, and I narrowed it down to staying in Philly. But at the time, UPenn was almost double the cost of Temple. And I remember my dad kind of, sitting me down and saying, like, can you justify spending double with what you're going to get afterwards? And I have lots of friends that have attended Penn and loved it, and it's a wonderful dental school. But at the time, I couldn't. I didn't know what I could say that would justify it. And I liked Temple a lot too. And it just made sense then for me to go somewhere where I could leave with less debt load. And I think that's something to definitely consider. That also being said, there is one dental school in the US, University of the Pacific, that is only a 3-year dental school. So it's the only 3-year dental school instead of 4 years. And so that, again, would save you a little bit of money. They do go year round, so there is no break for them. That's kind of the way that they keep it in the 3-year track as well. But that's something I didn't know. So those are things that if you're in college, I think that by the time you're in college, it really makes sense to start shadowing or working in a dental office if it's at all possible for you. The dental community is actually quite small. And so, we tend to know a lot of other people. And so then when you make a connection with someone, they might know, oh, I know someone that went to this school, and they can introduce you, because having a recommendation letter from an alumni or even knowing someone that maybe helps with admissions can be really, really advantageous. And I think sometimes people think that it's not going to make a difference, but you'd be surprised on how many of us know each other, and kind of that community grows. And it's, we do kind of know people all over the place because of going to school in one location and then practicing in another. So definitely try to get into dental offices and see kind of who's there, and also how they're working. I think one of the best things I did was kind of going into different practices, especially when I was getting to the point of finishing school, just because I was able to see what I wanted my practice to look like, and kind of how I was going to want to practice. And so it's helpful if you kind of make some of these connections and see things that you like and things that you don't like, so that when you get out of school, you know what you're looking for. So how did I pick dentistry and orthodontics? So I had actually always wanted to be an orthodontist. I say that probably because I made the decision at like 12. I had an absolutely wonderful dentist who went to Temple and actually encouraged me to look at that school originally. She was also from a family of dentists. So her dad and brother were dentists, and she was actually the hygienist at the office for the longest time. She went back to school and became a dentist, met her husband at dental school as well. And I always really enjoyed seeing her. And I know a lot of kids are scared of the dentist, but Dr. Ellen was the coolest. She knew all about the Thundercats, which is a cartoon that's way too old for you guys. But she made me comfortable, and I really liked the experience that I had there, and it made me want to have a similar experience with patients. And then when I saw my orthodontist, I had the headgear and everything. I had like the phase 1 treatment and the phase 2 treatment later. But my orthodontist, Dr. Robert Bryan, he was actually is a dual trained pedo ortho. And he was great. It was so fun being in the office. It was such like a nice upbeat environment that I was like, this is really cool. I always was interested in healthcare, and I was like, this would be great. If this was my whole day is like, I mean, everyone's happy here all the time. No one's scared to come here. I was like, this is what I want to do. So I'm totally biased, but I think being an orthodontist is the best. And I'm glad I don't have to do root canals anymore. But it's just such a fun environment. And you can really, with ortho, you can really make your niche however you want. You could have a very kind of like upscale office that caters just to adults in the middle of a city that's quiet, and it's going to be more like a hotel when you go in, or a spa. Or you could have an office that's like super busy and is just upbeat and music's playing and has a totally different vibe. And so I like that you can really cater this to your personality. The one other great thing is that patients are mostly healthy. So we don't really treat unhealthy patients, because if they have other issues going on, they really probably shouldn't be doing ortho. And so they kind of want to see you. They're not there because they're in pain. They're not there because, they're being forced to. I mean, there's few and far between. We have some that mom's making them, but for the most part, they want to kind of get a great smile, and they're there and helping do all that. And so it's also really neat watching people grow up, watching our teenagers grow up and kind of transform into these young adults, and kind of getting to be a part of such like an important milestone of their lives. And the other really neat thing about ortho is that it's evolving fast, and it's such this combination of like artistry and almost like architecture and physics combined with like biology. And I mean, now we're getting into 3D printing and doing like our own aligners here. And I think it's just one of those things where you can find something you like in it and really kind of just follow it, you know, and the tech is just going faster and faster. So I want to show you this quick little video. These are the common ortho instruments that we use for all of our cases. So basically everyone that sits down to have an appointment is going to go through most of these instruments. Let me just see if it works.
Explaining orthodontic instruments, part 1. So this is a standard setup for our adjustment appointments. It contains a math out, a Weingart, a distal end cutter, a ligature cutter, cotton pliers, a mirror. We use self-ligating brackets, so these two are door openers for our brackets, a scaler with a pusher, and a ligature director. So this is used to clip the ends of the wire. This one is used to cut smaller pieces of the wire or different ligatures that we use. You'll commonly see this one being used to put those colored ties on. This one is used to help direct and guide the wire into position. Opening the doors. This one helps guide the wire into place. And this helps remove those colored ties. The scaler cleans up in between teeth. And the pusher helps tuck away pieces that we don't want to poke you.
So obviously we have other instruments that we use when we're bonding patients or when we are debonding and taking braces off, but these are the instruments that we use on the vast majority of our patients every single day. So for a typical day for me, so this is a picture of our clinic. I did a tour on the Instagram today. So if you guys haven't seen, I did a tour of our office. You can check that out in the stories. And I normally work 8:30 to 5 on Monday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And then on Tuesdays, we work a little bit later. We work 11 to 7. And on Fridays, it's a bit of a shorter day. We work usually 8 to 2. And then I do some admin work. Once a month, I do go to a pediatric office, which is in the town next to me, about 20 minutes away. And I see patients of theirs at that office. There is only one other orthodontic practice in that town. And so it just helps kind of get some patients seen a little bit quicker there. And then I do teach once a month out at the University of British Columbia in the graduate orthodontic department. So I'm basically teaching and running a clinic that is for the students that are becoming orthodontists. So they've already gone through dental school and now they're doing their residency programs. And we have residents from all over the world there. It's a really great program, and it's newer. I would say it's about 7 years old, but it's a really nice program, and the school is beautiful. I'm just going to show you a little bit of doing a clean check. So if you guys are aware, Invisalign is a type of clear aligner system that we use to move teeth. And to do that, we do a video scan of the teeth, and it creates a model like this. And then I just kind of zoomed up me actually going in and editing one of the clean checks. And so what I'm doing here is I'm kind of aligning the teeth on where I want them to go. So I get them from the start, and I'm going to make a position of where I want them to go at the end. And what's neat with this kind of software is that I'm able to move each tooth individually. I'm able to customize the attachments based on the movements. And this is kind of what we're getting into with doing our own 3D printing, is that we would do this all in-house. So instead of outsourcing the production of these aligners to a company like Align or Invisalign, is we'd just be making them here with our own 3D printers. We use 2 different clear aligners here at our practice. We use Invisalign, partly because it's the one that's most well known to patients. Invisalign does some great marketing directly to consumers, which is unusual for like a dental company. And then we also use what's called Spark, which is a company by Ormco. They also make Damon braces, which are the brackets that we use. So we like the company, and so we use their clear aligners as well. I do find that they both work effectively. At this point, plastic is plastic, and the teeth can't tell really the difference between them. A lot of Invisalign's original patents have expired, and so there's probably about 20 different clear aligner companies on the market now. And so any of them you could use well and effectively, kind of just depends on what your practice prefers. So when I go in and review ClinChecks, you can see that I can pull the images up on the left, and I can use that as comparison as I'm going through and making adjustments on this patient's file. Usually I spend about 10 minutes on a case, a little bit less once I've done a review of it. So that'll go off to the Align company, and it comes back with the adjustments, and I have to approve it before it's made. What that does is it spits out a bunch of trays. So if I moved a tooth from A to B, it might take 8 trays to get to from A to B, and then that's how the aligners are fabricated. Now, normally, actually, you can kind of see on the background, this is my massive computer in my office. I have a huge widescreen because I normally have photos up, the Invisalign ClinCheck, and x-rays up all at once, and I can just kind of view everything at the same time. So I'm going to go over 3 cases with you guys. So this is a case where on the bottom left here, can you guys, I'm going to see if I can move my mouse there. Okay. So this patient came in, that doesn't look too bad here when you're first looking at things, but if you look at this x-ray on the top, we have a couple of things going on. One, she still has 3 baby teeth in, and that's the silver guy, that's the stainless steel crown. We have this baby tooth over here, that's the baby molar, and then we still have a baby canine up here, and I had the arrows to them in the actual intraoral image as well. Now you can also see that she has an impacted canine that is stuck up there because the baby has not been lost, but is otherwise in a good position. The baby molar down here is blocking the second premolar, and it is a little bit underdeveloped. You can see how it doesn't look like it has much of a root on it yet. And part of the reason that it's underdeveloped is because on the other side, it's congenitally missing. So she does not have this tooth, and we do see this quite a bit. So if on one side we're missing a tooth, the opposite sides tend to be either a little bit small or a little delayed in formation. So what we did for her was we extracted the 2 baby teeth where there was a successor. And she actually had to have the canine exposed. So there was a chain that was placed onto the canine, and it was essentially helped to pull it back down into its proper position. Now, we left the stainless steel crown baby tooth for now. Normally, like if it was my own kid, I probably would have taken it out and pulled those other 2 teeth forward and just closed the space. However, that does increase the time in bracing significantly. These, if you look at the bottom x-ray, the 2 big molars that are behind here, they're large, and this is a far distance to move them forward. To move both of these guys forward, we probably would have needed something called a TAD, which is a temporary anchorage device, and it goes down into the gums. And it would have probably taken another year and a half in treatment. Mom and Dad were not interested in that. They didn't think she could handle keeping braces on for that long, and they preferred to just maintain the baby tooth for as long as possible. Now, when we maintain a baby tooth like this, it really varies. I have my brother-in-law has a baby tooth, and he's in his 30s, and it's perfectly fine. It's rock solid in there. I've seen patients in their 50s and 60s with still having a baby tooth. This baby tooth does not have the greatest prognosis because, one, the roots are very short. Now, baby teeth are always shorter than the permanent teeth. So you can see that by comparison there, but this one is particularly short. And also because it has the stainless steel crown on it, it already was compromised with decay when the child was younger. And so that decay will come back at some point. That junction is just never perfect. When we put a restoration on, we can get it as close as possible, but it's never going to be quite the same seal as what was originally there. And so this will last her for a good little while, and at least until she's an adult and could have an implant placed down the road if and when it gets loose and falls out. So this was her before on the top and her after on the bottom. And so you can see that she had some crowding that we relieved, and we just kind of rounded out those arches. The only disadvantage to leaving this tooth as well, as you can see, if you look from her left to her right, that silver tooth is quite a bit larger than the premolar that would have been there. So that does kind of throw the bite off the hair on her right side because it's a little bit bigger than it should be, and then it should be to its counterparts. So when those guys meet on it, they're taking up a little bit more room. But otherwise, she has a great bite, and she's really comfortable and happy with how things look. So this case is what we call an open bite case, and this patient has obviously extremely tapered, what we call tapered arches. It's very, very narrow. You can see that the crowding and the constriction that's here. And then basically what happened is he's a mouth breather, and so his tongue was lying down here and kind of developed this lower jaw, but ideally our tongue should be up on the roofs of our mouths, and so it was not, and so that's why this upper arch is so tapered. And so then when he bites down, he's biting just on those those back teeth there. And then that's propping him open, and his tongue is then going to thrust forward. So whenever you have an opening, you can try this yourself. If you try to open your mouth and swallow, it's almost impossible to do without your tongue making a seal. So whether your tongue comes up to the roof of your mouth to make a seal, or it thrusts forward into the opening. And so a lot of patients that have open bites also have a tongue thrust when they swallow. The difficult part about this is it's a habit. And so you have to retrain your tongue to come back again, or else over time it's going to want to keep doing this. So for this patient, we ended up using some elastics, and we also used some bends in the back. Our mouth is kind of like a wedge. And so when we want to close the bite down, you can do it in two ways. You can either pull down in the front, but that does tend to have a little bit higher of a relapse. It's going to want to bounce back open. Or we can take that wedge and push up on those back teeth, and then the whole bite kind of closes. And the advantage of that is it's very stable, and you have to do a lot less movement. So for every millimeter that we close in the back, we can expect about 3 millimeters to close in the front. And so it's a really great way to create a stable bite. And so that's what we did a bit more for him, because if you look at his previous smile line, his upper teeth were actually at a good spot. We don't want to bring those teeth down too much, or we're going to show too much gums on him. And so we wanted to keep that height of his lip at about the same position. And so this is when we use some intrusion to get that to go up there nicely. All right, so this is another patient, and I actually showed a bit of her on the Instagram story because I met her sister this morning. But she was a patient that we treated about 2 years ago, and she was congenitally missing her upper laterals. And this is very common for patients to miss the upper laterals, and those are your two side teeth there next to your centrals. And on here, you can see that these are her canines starting to poke through. And so the teeth that she's missing would have fallen right here in those spaces. And so for her, if we look at her x-rays, you can see on the top left here, when I first saw her, this is when we diagnosed her as having those teeth that were missing. They weren't just behind and coming in, and she still had some baby teeth. So we weren't ready to get started. But mom and dad did not want to do implants. So one of the ways when you're missing teeth is you can just hold space and put an implant in. Or we can do something that's called canine substitution. And we're taking the canines and we're literally substituting them in for the laterals. So we're pulling them forward and closing the space. And so in the middle picture here, this is while we were in treatment. So you can see we're kind of uprighting these teeth, getting them into alignment. And then on the right-hand side, you can see that that was when we closed all the spaces. And so when she first got her braces off, this is how she looked. We had done a little bit of recontouring on these laterals here, on the canines here to look a little bit more like laterals. You can see canines do tend to be a little bit darker in color, and they're obviously usually pointy. I didn't love the gum lines on these canines just because it made the teeth look a little bit too short. So we did a little bit of laser on them when she came back for one of her retainer checks, and we basically just raised the gum height of those to make them look more like a lateral. Now, the canines are usually a bit wider, so sometimes the bite doesn't fit together quite as nicely as you would want. But I think for her, this came out really nice. And the advantage is I don't think too many people would know that those are her canines right next to her central incisors. And she'll never need an implant. She'll never need a restoration. And some people end up doing some bondings on them to make them look a little bit more square. But I think for her, this looks really great. And, maybe a little bit of whitening just to kind of even the shades would go a long way. But this was a case where, it's a way to save a patient a lot of money on implants and just kind of long-term health of those teeth and the bone. So if you saw on the Instagram stories, her sister is actually congenitally missing 7 teeth. Her sister is missing her primary lateral incisors, the permanent lateral incisors, and then 3 of her premolars. So we're talking about these teeth back here, these premolars. So her sister is actually missing the one up here and then both of the ones at the bottom. So right now we're just kind of monitoring her until she gets a little bit older, but most likely we'll be working on trying to close a lot of those spaces for her so that maybe at the end she doesn't need 5 implants, we might just need like 2. And so again, to kind of reduce that financial burden and then also just the upkeep of having an implant in there is something that you have to take care of. Implants are wonderful. They're way better, I think, in my opinion, than like a bridge for replacing things for the health of the adjacent teeth. But the thing is, a lot of our studies on implants are 30 years long. and there's not a whole lot of studies that go beyond 30 years. And so for a patient that's congenitally missing a tooth, if they can get an implant in their early 20s, that still only puts them at their early 50s. And that's still young to me. And so it's kind of, well, what's going to happen? Are they still going to last you another 40 years until you're in your 90s? And what do we really expect out of something that's man-made, that we put in the mouth, that we're using every single day, hard, we're biting and we're chewing, and it doesn't get a break. So if at all possible, we like to do things where we can close spaces and eliminate the need for an implant. And if not, then of course we make space and just hold it there for when they're a bit older and they're able to get that. All right, so I'm gonna open it up to some questions. I can gladly show you guys more cases or things like that, but I'll see if you guys have any questions first that I can answer, and we'll go from there.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Felty. We have some questions in the chat. So the first question is, do you think it's more beneficial to go to a 2-year college after high school or go straight to university?
I think honestly, you're fine to do either. You can go to a 2-year and then transfer into a 4-year school. I think depending as well, there's a lot of great 2-year colleges that tend to be a little bit closer to home, and they tend to be more financially advantageous for people. And so I know that, I'm from Pennsylvania, so like Penn State is a big school, and they have some branch campuses that are only 2 years. And you can't actually complete your degree there. You have to transfer to main campus for some of the majors that you're in. So that's what my goddaughter did. She went to a branch campus for 2 years, kind of like a sister school, and then completed her degree at main campus. And I think that that's perfectly fine. I think the biggest thing is that you're just taking the courses that are required. I think if you get a good grade in bio at any school, that looks good on your application. Getting a poor grade from a great school does not help you. So I think it's more just kind of, if you're focusing on the courses that you need to take and doing well in those, it doesn't really matter what school you go to.
Thank you. The next question is, what is the best way to reach out to a dentist's office for shadowing?
Yeah. So first start with, if you personally have a dentist, which you all should, first reach out to them, and just when you're in for your appointment, or even just giving them a call and just saying, hey, I'm really interested in the field. Is there, any advice you have? Can I come and hang out and see what goes on during the day? And then beyond that, if you're just in the area, reaching out and saying, hi, I'm a student who's, I'm attending university here in town, and I'm really interested in pursuing a career in dentistry, and I'm looking at applying to dental schools. I wondered if I can come in and shadow. But I mean, shooting an email, I honestly, like, if you can, call the front office and leave a message with the receptionist, because then it's going to go to the doctor. Sometimes the emails that you find on like the practice website go to different people. Like I know, for example, our main email is like an info, but it actually goes to our office manager. And then she kind of usually delegates it out. So I would get it eventually, but it's not my email. But you can also, look up in like the ADA member directory. You can search by town, and you can usually find the doctor's email on like a membership directory from either the American Dental Association or whatever country you're from will have an association member list. But I think just giving them a call or phoning them and just saying, hey, I'm interested. Most of us are happy to have people come in and kind of, we love our job. So we love to kind of share that experience with other people. When I was in dental school, after my first year of dental school, I actually didn't enjoy it. I'll be honest. I always knew I wanted to do ortho. So my first year, when we were in class all day and we were working on the mannequins, I was like, oh, this is not for me. Like, I made a wrong choice here. Like, I don't want to do this. And I was really nervous about spending the next, 5 years and maybe not liking it. And so I was like, okay, I need to spend the summer working with an orthodontist and making sure like that's still my end goal. And so but again, I was kind of like, I was in Philly. It was not the town I was from. My orthodontist back home had moved to another location, so he was farther away. I was gonna have to commute like an hour to go to his office. He said, sure, come, spend the summer. But I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to drive a lot. And I kind of thought it was probably my last opportunity to travel. It was the only summer in dental school that we had off. So I went to Australia, and before I left, I emailed about 10 practices in Australia. And I was like, can I come shadow? I'm gonna be in Australia. I'm a dental student, and I want to learn more about ortho. And one of the offices I didn't hear from, and the other 9, not knowing me at all said, come on in, spend the whole summer here. And so I actually worked at 2 different offices in the summer. just kind of shadowing and helping with sterilization and just doing kind of odd things. But I learned a lot, and I realized that, I did want to do that. And by the time I got to seeing patients in dental school, it was definitely a 180 for me. And I really enjoyed that like doctor-patient relationship and kind of helping people. And so, yeah, so that was, I think you just got to reach out. People are more than happy to have you.
Thank you. Someone asked, did you learn how to use Clinic Check Invisalign in dental school or residency?
Yeah, so we did not learn it in dental school. In fact, Temple has basically almost no ortho education besides like an academic part. We had like a course where it was like, reading articles and that kind of stuff. But we didn't actually do ortho when I was in dental school, which is a shame, but it's sometimes hard. You're only in with clinics for 2 years, and most ortho treatment is longer. So unless you're able to see like shorter phase 1 cases, it gets quite difficult to actually treat orthodontic patients in dental school. So we didn't do any ClinCheck when I was in undergrad, but then when I went to residency, we did. Now, my program director at the time, I am coming up on like 10 years out of school. So, Invisalign even 10 years ago was still developing. It wasn't what it is today. But our program director was heavily involved with Invisalign when it first started. So we actually did get to do a lot of cases with Invisalign. I was doing extraction cases with Invisalign, right from the get-go. And so that was really helpful. But a lot of these companies, when they have new products, they also have really good CE or user manuals and things like that, because they know that you're not just going to be able to like sit down and some people will figure it out on your own. And so it was just kind of from going to some of their courses and learning from other people, what are the tips and tricks of using the software. And then of course it gets easier and easier the more you do it.
Someone asked, how long did it take for you to adapt to studying for dental school? Did you have to change your studying habits often?
Yeah. So I will say the one advantage that swimming in college offered me was I didn't have a lot of free time. And so I kind of learned that when I was between class and between practice, it was kind of like I had to get stuff done. And in fact, when my season would end at the end of March, I definitely was like, I totally would slack off for like April and May, because it was like someone wasn't forcing me to be up at 5:30 in the morning. And so then, I definitely got like lazier. And so having that regiment really helped. And when I went to dental school, that was definitely very different for me, because I obviously wasn't competing anymore. And I didn't have as much of a structure, which I found to be hard to kind of like institute on myself. And I have heard from a lot of athletes that this is a difficult transition for them, is when they go from being so regimented to like not regimented at all. So for me, what I did was I just made it a point that like I went to school like an hour early every day. And then I just knew like in my head, I had to be at school at 7:30, even though classes didn't start till 8:30. And then I did work then. Part of it was Temple is not in the best area of Philly. So I never stayed once it got dark. I always left as soon as we were done, except if it was like in the summer and it was lighter out, I would stay later. But in the winter, like when it hit 5 o'clock, I was out of there, because I just didn't want to be alone walking home or like walking to my car. And so I wasn't going to the library or anything like that. When I was in dental school, though, I was living with a med student, and two of my past swim teammates, one was a nurse and one was getting her master's. So we all kind of were still in a little bit of that study mindset. And so I could still study at home. It wasn't like people were partying and I was trying to do work. And so that was helpful. But I think for me, it was just kind of knowing that every day I had an hour, and I did that all through residency as well. And so it was just nice. I'd get there early, do whatever I needed to get done before the day or had left over from the day before. And just kind of having that designated hour really can like just focus your attention on and not be distracted by like the TV or chores or things like that.
Thank you. Someone asked, would you say that the work of a dentist on a daily basis is very strenuous compared to other fields?
So, it's funny. My husband and I talk about this sometimes, and I do think that I think a lot of people, if you ask them what the most stressful part of their job in dentistry is they will say managing staff. And it's because we're not experienced in it. It's not that it's because it's the actual most difficult thing I do every day. It's because it's the thing I have the least amount of knowledge in. And therefore I know I'm not doing the best job on it, right? I know that there are times where I fail as a boss, and there are times where I've had to let someone go and say, this was all on me. Like I was a bad boss to you and I didn't make this work for you. And so I think that's hard on us. And I think because that's such a large component of your job is like running a practice. I mean, I don't think there's like any other profession where you're like so inadequately trained for like half of your job. Because like, sure, we can do whatever you want on the teeth. I'm happy to see any patient. But then it's like you're learning everything else on the fly. And so I think that is what makes dentistry stressful to people, is kind of that practice management, especially if you're starting out opening a practice on your own and you don't have any background. And so, I mean, a lot of people associate first, and that, I think, a lot is just to kind of gain the experience of, well, what do I need to do? What should I be looking at? How do I do that? How do I get systems in place? But I think the tooth part is like the easy part. You know, my husband and I joke, because we always say, like, you know, he gives me a hard time if I say like I had a bad day at work, and he'll be like, because, you know, as a general dentist, you know, he'll have stuff where, oh, he can't get a tooth out, or, you know, someone's in pain and he can't get them numb and whatnot. And then he'll joke and say like, oh, you couldn't bond a bracket on today. It was really difficult. And, you know, I will say ortho is in comparison quite easy. I think ortho is more emotionally draining, because we see 50 to, like, in our practice, we see like 50 to 75 patients a day, and you kind of have to be like on it for each one, you know, and you want to be like a bright spot in that person's day. And so you got to be kind of chipper and happy, like every time you sit down, even if you just had a bad appointment like 2 minutes before. So I think that's the harder part. You know, in terms of my day-to-day, it's just if like, oh, I had a bad appointment, to kind of be able to like let it go so that I can still be like good and happy and excited to see my next patient.
Someone asked, besides shadowing, what are some other opportunities that a pre-dental student can get involved in at a dental office?
Yeah. So I know a lot of things that like we hire for that don't technically need like experience are sterilization techs. So some offices you can even ask, this is not appropriate. We say after school girls, but they really should just be after school people. A lot of times it's because there are people that want to become assistants later, but as dentists, you like, if you're interested in becoming dentistry, you could totally do it. And we have those staff come in, and a lot of them are high school students. Some of them are college who have courses in the morning, but they come in the afternoons when things are busy and when essentially your instruments, so both in general dentistry or ortho, have kind of piled up from the morning and need to get run through sterilization. And so like we have 2 sterilization techs who basically process all the instruments for us, put everything away at our office. And in some ortho offices, they have what's called a runner, which is basically a person that's literally running to get stuff for all the other staff. So they have to know where all the inventory is, where everything is. And the idea is to not have, you know, our staff members who are working on the patient, so the certified dental assistants, be getting up and down to grab things, and they have a person do that. We have a records tech, so someone that's taking photos and doing the scan. So we use a scanner. We don't take impressions. So they're taking scans, which are like a video of the teeth. Here in BC and in a lot of states, you can get what's called your X-ray certification, which is a weekend course, and that also allows you to take X-rays. So there, you can technically be like an X-ray tech and do X-rays. So those are all things that you can kind of like offer and say, like, I'd be willing to do any of these jobs. In an ortho office, you could be trained on how to make like the clear plastic retainers. It's not a very difficult thing to do. It just takes a couple tries. So you could kind of be like a lab assistant. But yeah, there's a lot of different things you could do in the office, especially if you're not really, if you come across more as like, hey, I want experience, as opposed to like, hey, can you pay me? They might actually, you know, we like to hire for personality. So if I like someone who's come in and they're interested, then I'm going to look for ways to utilize them and pay them and bring them in and say, hey, okay, well, you know, while you're going to dental school or while you're at college, like, do you want to come and do a couple hours of work, you know, every day? Also, if you're interested in the tech side, a lot of ortho offices, as they're getting into 3D printing, need people to kind of set up the 3D models, get them on the printer, debase them out of the printers, wash them, cure them, and all that kind of stuff too. So yeah, I think if you reach out and just say like, I'm interested in kind of anything and helping out, you'd probably, if you bond well with that practice, they'll find work for you to do. Yeah.
The next question is, do you think working as a dental assistant counts as shadowing?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So, and there are states where, depending on the regulations, you don't actually have to go to school to be an assistant. You can be just what they call a chairside. So here in BC, a chairside assistant can suction, they can hand you things, but they can't do anything like alone, if that makes sense. So they can't put in the wire or take it out, but they can suction while I'm doing a bonding. They can hand me all the brackets, you know, and they can basically get everything ready for me. In Pennsylvania, where I'm from, the assistants can actually do everything in ortho as long as they're trained on site, because Pennsylvania's regulations are based on whether or not the procedure they do is reversible. So in ortho, pretty much everything we do could be reversible. And so there you could go and become a full ortho assistant while you're in school. And it does teach you a lot if you have assisting experience for when you become an employer. It's a little bit easier than to kind of manage staff when you've been on the other side and know, like, well, is this doable? Isn't this doable? What is the expectation here? And things like that. So I think it 100% would help a lot.
Someone asked, would you say that the workload of dental school is overwhelming? Is it easy to balance the school workload with other things?
Yeah, so I think the hardest part, so for me, because like my day when I was in college was I would swim, I'd go to school, and then I would swim again. I kind of had a full day already. And I did work part-time, just like babysitting. If you are someone who is in college, who does not have a part-time job and is only going to school, you're probably only going to have like 3 or 4 hours of class, maybe a day. Maybe more with your labs, but you're just going to have smaller chunks. You're not actually doing like an 8-hour shift. You might be studying, but you're not like sitting in class. So I think the transition from college to dental school that is hard for some people is that you're now going to school for 8 hours, and you essentially never did that before, because even when you were in high school, you would go to school and it was like 6.5, and you'd have like gym and like a study period, and you weren't actually in courses for that long. Where for most dental schools, you're going to be in class from like 8:30 to 11:30 and have a lunch, and then you're going to go back from like 1 to 4 and be in class again, and then you're going to go home and do work. And so I think the hard part is just kind of adjusting, of being like attentive for that long in a day, if that makes sense. And so I think, the biggest thing is just making sure that, you're going to class. I think a lot of times people, they kind of get in the habit a little bit of maybe in college where they had a course that they didn't really have to show up to all the time. And they, would skip every now and then. But I think in dentistry, you want to make sure that you're there. Your faculty are also going to be more willing to be helpful to someone that seems engaged and interested in. So if you are finding you're struggling, if they know you're showing up for class every day and you're paying attention, they're going to be more willing to help you. They want you to succeed in dental school. And so, I think if you just kind of say, I'm going to make it a point to physically be there, you'll be okay.
Next question is, how many hours should a patient wear their Invisalign?
Yeah, so ideally 20 to 22 hours a day. I say that about 100 times a day. We want them in essentially all the time, except for when they're brushing and for when they're eating. And so I always tell patients, it literally means you take them out, you eat, and you put them right back in. It's not, you take them out, you drive to the city, you have a 4-hour meal and drive home and say, they were only out for dinner, I swear. So we want them in pretty much all day. We tell patients it's like braces, but they're just plastic instead. So the braces are on all day long. The Invisalign has to be in fairly close to that.
The next question is, in case 1, do you think root canal treatment after you do you need to do root canal treatment after you pull the canine down?
No, oftentimes you do not need to do any root canal treatment on there. Essentially, the tooth has just been jammed up and it's lost a little bit of its eruption, like stimulus in a way. And so a lot of times when we put a chain on it, we're not even really pulling that hard on it. We're using what's like a small elastic thread through the chain. So it's a very light force. We're just kind of redirecting it. So what's happening, oftentimes those canines, they kind of like, if this is your lateral, they kind of come in angled and then they hit. And it's just that the friction between those two teeth is a little bit too much. So the chain just kind of unlocks it a bit so it can redirect down. And so no, it'd be rare. The bigger the risk is actually that the tooth doesn't want to move. So the longer you leave a tooth up there and it hasn't been addressed. So like, for example, in an adult, we occasionally get adults that have impacted teeth that either never got diagnosed or they just never bothered with treatment when they were younger. And they usually come to see us when one of the baby teeth finally fall out and they have that gap there. And it's kind of like, oh, I guess I should bring that guy in. But occasionally they're ankylosed, and it means that the body has just assumed it's bone and not a tooth, and it's fused now to the bone that's up there. And unfortunately, most of the time when they're ankylosed, you cannot move them and they need to come out. And what's interesting is that it doesn't happen bilaterally. So we actually just had 2 adult females that were in. both had impacted upper canines on both sides, and both of them, one moved and we got in, and one was ankylosed and we could not, and they had to take it out and put an implant on that side. So we can't really tell. Sometimes on our x-rays we can see if there's like a PDL, and sometimes when they go in to do the exposure, usually a periodontist or an oral surgeon would go in and expose them and put the little bracket on. They will oftentimes give it a shake just to make sure it has some movement. But sometimes even when they give it a little bit of a shake, it just kind of tightens up again after, and then it doesn't move. Other times they can see, nope, it's a no-go. They'll actually knock on it. It makes like kind of like a metallic sound if it's fused to the bone. And then they can tell us we had to take it out because we knew it was ankylosed.
Thank you. The next question is, what was it that made you got accepted into so many dental schools?
So I think for me, it was, I was a biology major, and I did do an honors degree, which required a thesis. So at Villanova, their honors program is basically, it's just coordinated with your college. So since I was a biology major, it was like the College of Sciences. So anyone that was a science major and was doing an honors degree would have gotten that same degree, but you had to present a thesis. So that's a little bit unusual for undergrad, and so I think that helped quite a bit. But I think it was kind of just being well-rounded. And I know you hear this a lot, and I don't want it to sound like quaint, but they want you to be like a personable person, because you're going to have a patient-doctor relationship. So they don't want someone who's just book smart, who can't have any interaction with people, because you got to be able to take care of people when you're their treating doctor. And so I think they like to see that you're well-rounded, because oftentimes if you are involved in multiple things, you've had interaction with multiple different types of people. And then also, I don't know how it is right now with COVID, but a lot of times you're interviewing, in person for dental schools, or at least maybe via Zoom right now. And so I think that matters in terms of how you leave people feeling. And so I think, as much as I want to say, like, be yourself, but you also want to be likable, if that makes sense. You want someone, when you leave that interview, to remember you, and obviously in a good way. But, you want to be able to make a connection with people, because they're going to use that to say, like, oh, they make a good connection with a patient. And so I think it's important that, you show that you're a little varied in your undergrad. And then when you go to that interview, that you seem like a nice person, because that's really, I think, what the interview they're looking for is. They're looking for someone that seems like genuinely they'd be like, oh, I wouldn't mind seeing them as a doctor. They seem like they were friendly and that I would like to talk to them. So I think that's really all the interview is looking for. They've already looked at your CV. They know what you've done. They're not there to question you on that.
The next question is, how do you solve white spots around the braces after taking it off?
Yeah, so white spots, the decalcifications you get, they're not fun. And we try to catch it when it first starts to happen. For us, we put them on like a high fluoride toothpaste or rinse. If we start to see it, we usually put them on like a short leash, where I will absolutely take braces off if they're getting worse. Otherwise, my husband will kill me if I keep sending patients back with like a whole bunch of white spots. He will not be happy. There are a couple different products on the market, though. So there is a product called Opal Seal that you can apply before you put the braces on. That kind of acts a bit like a sealant. The only disadvantage is it can decrease a little bit of the bond strength of the bracket. So meaning the patient's more likely to break a bracket. So this might be a product that I would use more like if I had a patient in phase 1 that I know was struggling with hygiene, or I had a patient that was really high caries risk that I know going in we're going to have to kind of closely monitor. Honestly, though, if they're high caries risk, they're an Invisalign patient for me. I'm not even going to put braces on them. I'm just going to let them have their trays, because then they can take them off and brush like normal. But if afterwards they have it, we use a product that I really like. Is called Icon. And that's essentially it's kind of like an etch and a bleach, and then it kind of seals it. So that really lightens it and kind of makes the lesions kind of fade away. You can do other options in terms of like, there's a thing called MI paste, which is like a high calcium paste that helps kind of remineralize those areas, since they are a little bit less mineralized. And you can literally just take regular etch that we use when we prep cavities and literally just etch, bleach, etch, bleach, etch, bleach until you get to a nice point, and then you do a little sealant. But Icon's one of the easiest packaged materials, because it comes everything right in a row, like step 1, 2, and 3. So it's really easy to do chairside for our patients.
Let's do last 2 questions.
Sure.
So what are some complications that you can see with ortho treatment?
Yeah, so I think kind of the scariest things for us are root resorption. So whether that happens from like an impacted tooth laying on top of a tooth, or if it just happens, some people are just prone when we start moving teeth that the roots all get shorter. And some people they get shorter significantly, and some it can happen rather quickly. So even in the first like 8 months until I take a progress pan, so we do take a pan to check on that. And there are some things that make you more prone to resorption. So like the farther I move a tooth, the longer the braces are on. If the roots are very pointy, those are all things that kind of are indications that you may get more resorption. But I think for us, that's kind of the scariest thing I see is that, someone comes in and it's just like the roots are, really severely damaged, and the teeth are loose, and that's all kinds of scary. But otherwise, I think for us, there's not too much that we see. I think I get some trauma cases, partly because, we'll bond a wire on. So I think like the worst one was I had a patient, luckily it was in braces. That's the only reason why his teeth were saved. He had a motorcycle accident where he had fallen off his motorcycle and he had a helmet on, but the handlebar came like up under. And so it took his two front teeth out and kind of flipped them upside down, but he still had his braces on. So they were hanging there. So he came in and we just had to kind of like, you have to put them back in there. But for a kid that doesn't have braces, a lot of times we'll do for like their general dentist, because we have nice, light, flexible wires. If they knock a tooth forward or backward, we can push it back and then just bond the wire like directly onto the teeth. It just acts a bit like a stabilizing splint because you want to allow it to have some movement so it doesn't just like fuse to the bone. But you also obviously need to stabilize it with something. So a lot of dentist offices don't now have wire. So if you're becoming a dentist, I highly recommend you buy a heavy duty fishing line. It'll do the same thing. So I have like a spool of fishing line, and you can just bond the fishing line straight to the teeth to act like a stabilizing unit if you have a patient with trauma and you don't have to have ortho wire at your office. Just put a little dot of composite like you would use to do a filling and put the little fishing line in there, and that'll hold it nice and stiff and they won't break it.
The last question is, how do you train your assistant to do they do the wire work? I'm not very sure, but how do you train them to do it in your office?
Yeah. So again, this is going to vary depending on where you live on what your assistants are allowed to do. So in Canada, to be an orthodontic assistant, anywhere in Canada, to be an orthodontic assistant, you have to be a certified dental assistant first, which is like a year-long course. And then they have to take an actual orthodontic module, which is a 2-week didactic and then 2-week clinical portion for them. So about a month of training before they can work for an orthodontist. And so the nice part is they come in kind of knowing dental lingo. And then they also kind of had a broad overview of ortho. Now, the tricky part with training staff for ortho is there's lots of brackets on the market. And so we all use a different one. We all use different wire sequences. It's kind of what makes ortho cool. There's like 10 ways to get to the same end result. So they kind of have to learn more of like what our systems are and what our sequence of treating a patient is. But like, for example, in Ontario, you actually have to have a hygienist as your orthodontic assistant. In Australia, you actually have to have a general dentist who's your assistant. The assistants are not allowed to be like ortho assistants, how we know them. Your assistant there to place a wire or to place brackets has to be an actual dentist. And so, but otherwise we train them. Some offices will actually train their staff to do a lot more than other offices. So for example, in my office, I place all the brackets myself. Some offices will allow the assistants to actually place the brackets, but then they come over and move them and cure them. But then at least the brackets are kind of like already partly on the teeth. My assistants place all the attachments for like Invisalign, partly because I've already designed it online. So I know what it's going to look like and what's going to come. So then I come and I like kind of clean up after the attachments are placed, but they do the initial placement of them in the little templates. But we do a lot of the training just kind of chairside. And as we get new people in, before they're allowed to see their own patients, they kind of like they assist another assistant and they kind of learn the lingo. And then we have kind of like codes in the office. We don't ever want to make a patient feel like they're being practiced on, or that an assistant doesn't know what's happening or what they're doing. And so we have like an abbreviation where we say like CYD, meaning like, so if I tell an assistant like, hey, put in this wire, then they might say to me, oh, can you CYD the wire? Meaning, can you demonstrate? And so the patient doesn't know what what we're asking. It just sounds like other technical weird dental terms, but it just lets me know that they don't feel comfortable doing it yet, or they haven't seen it yet from one of the other assistants, and so they want me to show them what to do first. And so I think the patient still feels very well taken care of, and then the assistant gets their training without it kind of being like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing, can you come put the wire back in? So so we do a lot of just training on site.
That's very interesting. Thank you so much, Dr. Felty, for today's
Sure.
session. It was very informative, and I'm pretty sure a lot of our viewers are very enjoying this session. And for the viewers, we already put the quiz link in our link tree, so feel free to do the quiz within 24 hours. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, no problem, guys. And I'll add my email and our social media handle in the stories on the Instagram, so that if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you.